Hello and welcome to the podcast Buffy and the Art of Story. If you love Buffy the Vampire Slayer and you love creating stories or just taking them apart to see how they work, you're in the right place. This time I'm looking at Season 7, Episode 17, Lies My Parents Told Me, where Robin Wood aims to kill Spike and Giles is in on the plan. I am Lisa M. Lilly, author of supernatural thrillers, mysteries, and the Writing as a Second Career books for writers. Along with the recap of Lies My Parents Told Me, today we'll talk about 3 nesting plots: Robin versus Spike, Giles versus Buffy, and Spike versus Spike. Whether Giles' arc in Season 7 to date and his choices in Lies My Parents Told Me fit his character, point of view and protagonists, and an unintended, I hope, episode theme. There will be no spoilers except in the foreshadowing section at the end. Remember, if you'd like to get more Buffy and the Art of Story content, you can join the Patreon community at patreon.com/Lisa M. Lilly. That's patreon.com/LISA. M as in Marie, LILLY. Okay, let's dive into the Hellmouth. Lies My Parents Told Me aired the first time on March 25, 2003. It was written by David Fury and Drew Goddard and directed by David Fury. On the DVD, this episode includes commentary by David Fury, Drew Goddard, James Marsters, who plays Spike, and D.B. Woodside, who plays Robin. It starts with opening conflict there to draw viewers right into the story. Here, it's a flashback to New York City Central Park in 1977. It's raining. Spike fights Slayer Nikki Wood. We know her from previous episodes. They spar verbally as well. Robin, as a little boy, watches from behind a bench. Nikki kicks Spike off of her, but he gets her in a hold and almost bites her. Robin knocks over a trash can to create a distraction, and Nikki breaks free. Nikki throws a stake and Spike catches it. He tells her he spent a long time tracking her down. He doesn't want to end it so soon. He throws the stake to the ground and leaves. As he exits, Spike says, "By the way, love the coat." Once he's gone, Nikki tells Robin he did a good job of staying down. But she tells him they can't go home now. It's not safe there anymore. She's taking him to Crowley's. Remember what she taught him. They always have to work the mission. She loves him, but she has a job. And she says, quote, "The mission is what matters, right?" He nods and she walks him away. At the end of the scene, Robin goes back to retrieve the stake from the ground and Nikki calls out, "Robin." The scene cuts to the present day. Robin, Buffy, and Spike are fighting vampires. Spike kills his, then stakes the one that's about to dive onto Robin. Spike gives Robin a hand up and tells him not to be afraid to use his stake. Robin gives him an odd look. Spike walks off, and Robin says, "Just waiting for my moment." He grips the stake so hard, blood drips from his hand. That is about 4 minutes into the episode. Typically around here or sooner, we'll see the story spark or inciting incident that sets the main plot rolling. Here, this whole first sequence more or less does that. We find out what Robin's motive is for wanting to kill Spike if we didn't recall from previous episodes, and the "just waiting for my moment" tells us that Robin is very serious about this, and in this episode will actively look for that moment. The main plot in this episode is a little unusual in that typically the protagonist is the main point of view character, and yet other than this opening, not that much of the episode is clearly from Robin's point of view, although he appears much more in this episode than in previous ones. Nonetheless, it is the overarching plot. We spend the most time in it, and it is what drives the whole episode. After the credits, Robin looks through the window in his principal's office into the hallway of Sunnydale High. Buffy enters. They agree that everything seems normal. Even the swing choir and the marching band are back to their usual seething resentment. No more war. Robin thinks Buffy might have stopped it, and Buffy tells him it can't be that easy. He's shocked that she would call what happened last episode easy, which was fighting off the students in the high school and getting Andrew to close the seal. But Buffy tells him any apocalypse she stops without dying is an easy one. He tells her she reminds him of his mother. She tells him that's not something every girl wants to hear, but in this case she'll take the compliment and maybe everything is okay. Cue Giles, who walks in and says, "Everything's terrible, total catastrophe." Buffy says, "Giles, what's wrong?" And Giles responds, "Have you seen the new library? There's nothing but computers. There's not a book to be seen." Such a great intro for Robin to Giles and a callback to Giles sparring with Jenny Calendar over books and computers. Giles asks who they speak to about this. Robin says that would be him and introduces himself. Giles comments he heard Robin's a freelance demon fighter, which is great. They're dangerously low on allies. And Giles tells Buffy the Seers and the Coven say the First is gathering its forces. War is inevitable. So this explains why Giles hasn't appeared in recent episodes. I don't recall if that was ever mentioned during those episodes. Then he says they need to go before the school board. Robin doesn't quite follow, thinking Giles is still talking about the apocalypse. Then he realizes Giles means about the library. David Fury and Drew Goddard both said this was a tough scene because there was a lot of exposition to get out and a long time spent with just the actors in one room, which is always a challenge. Later on, they'll do a kind of who's on first routine to get in the info about the chip, the soul, and the trigger, which I find really funny and shows that one way to deal with exposition is to use a little humor to poke fun at it. Giles says knowledge is from crafted binding and pages, not ones and zeros. Buffy asks him if he found more potentials on his trip, but he tells her the trip wasn't about that. It was about Spike. He's very concerned ever since Buffy let the military remove the chip from Spike's head. Robin asks about the chip. Buffy explains it and adds that Spike won't hurt anyone because of his soul. Giles protests the First could trigger him. Robin asks if he means trigger the chip. Buffy corrects him that the trigger is post-hypnotic. The First put it in Spike's head. It made Spike kill again. And Robin says, so he has a trigger, a soul, and a chip. Giles, glaring at Buffy, says not anymore. But Buffy tells him it was killing Spike and then tells Robin the trigger's not active anymore. And Robin says because the military gave him a soul. They both give him a look, and Giles points out they don't know the trigger's inactive. This is something that ongoing has bothered me about Buffy, and I didn't include her in my opening, but this is a place where I find her inconsistent. She doesn't know that the chip is inactive, and we're never given a reason for her to think so. And until now, I assumed that Buffy was aware the chip might still be active and the First just wasn't pulling Spike's strings at the moment, but that she was being vigilant and not letting him around anyone unless she was there to stop him. But now Buffy takes the position that the trigger's inactive, and she'll be inconsistent throughout this episode about that. Giles now says he brought something back that could help them see about the trigger. Buffy argues the trigger was the song Spike sang, but she doesn't remember what it was. Robin asks about what Giles brought back, and Giles says it'll take a bit of magic. On the DVD, the writers commented that this is one of the problems with extended mythology in the show, that you have to make it clear to the viewers and sometimes do that with a joke like Robin's about the military giving Spike a soul. I feel like this too is a symptom of Buffy as a show being at the cutting edge of doing long-form storytelling before streaming was available. So you really did have to remind viewers much more often what the deal was, because it might be many weeks between when they saw episodes, or even months, that dealt with these issues. This whole scene doesn't have any one clear point of view. Sometimes as a viewer, I feel more in sympathy with Robin, who's sitting there confused, sometimes with Giles, more so with Buffy, perhaps just because she's the protagonist of the show. But it implicates all three plots: Robin versus Spike, Spike versus himself, which we will get to, and Giles versus Buffy, which will start in a bit, but is signaled here with this tension between them. The scene cuts to Xander chaining Spike and grumbling that the chains weren't there a week ago, presumably a reference to him and Anya having sex on the cot in the last episode. Spike is not happy that Robin is there to watch the show, and that is what Robin's going to do in this part of the scene, not take an active role. Giles holds out a small black stone that needs to go in Spike's brain to unleash ideas, memories, whatever might be triggering Spike. Willow chants a spell. The stone turns into more of a worm or an insect. Giles shows it to Spike, holding it near his face. And this part is mostly from Spike's point of view, because he is wondering how this is supposed to get in his brain. When he sees this thing moving, he says, "Oh, you have got to be joking. What now?" Giles responds, "It has to access the cerebral cortex via the optic nerve." And Spike says, "Oh, bollocks. All the rubbish people keep sticking in my head. It's a wonder there's any room for my brain." Giles, very funny, says, "I don't think it takes up that much space, do you?" The insect-like thing goes into Spike's eyes. He closes both and yells out in pain. Buffy rushes to him to ask if he's all right. Both writers commented that this was a very hard scene to write. One said because there was so much to explain about what the stone is and what it does, but the characters are still in conflict, which helps. The other found it hard because there are so many shades of gray. There's no clear good guy or bad guy, unlike in many episodes. And there are so many hidden agendas that need to be expressed. D.B. Woodside said he was so impressed seeing James Marsters over and over acting out the scene where the stone goes into his eye for all the different takes. And he said it's really tricky to act when you have no idea how it's going to look on screen. After that stone goes into Spike's eye and he screams, the scene cuts to a flashback. Spike watches himself in the old days, shortly before he became a vampire. He reads poetry to his mother. The very flowery poem mentions Cecily. The mother calls him William, says it's magnificent, and asks about Cecily. The mother thinks Cecily is lovely and doesn't want William to be alone. He needs a woman in his life. William says he has one and looks at her. She laughs. And he clarifies that he does hope to find a wife, but he promises to always look after her. Drew Goddard said he really enjoyed writing the bad Victorian poetry. He was so proud of how very bad it really was. They both liked seeing Spike's humanity and how much he loves his mother, and said they tried to walk a line. Yes, he's a mama's boy, but there's lots of genuine love and concern when he says he'll always take care of her. His mother looks very happy, but she starts coughing, eventually coughing up blood. She tells him not to send to the doctor. Probably in that time period, there was really no point and not much the doctor could do. She asks him to just sit with her. William sits on the floor and rests his head against her knees, and she sings, "Early one morning, just as the sun was shining, I heard a maid sing in the valley below. Oh, don't deceive me, oh, never leave me." How could you use a poor maiden so? Now we get to the 1/4 twist, that first major plot turn that comes from outside the protagonist, spins the story in a new direction and raises the stakes. And here it is very clear. Spike's eyes pop open. The scene shifts to the present, and he vamps out, grabs Buffy, and flings her across the room. He throws the cot he was sitting on. It hits Dawn. Spike growls and yells and tries to attack, held back only by the chains. But then he screams from pain in his head, the stone drops out of his eye, and he seems like he's back to normal, though Buffy glares at him. The camera closes up on Robin, and there's a cut to the commercial. All of this scene is in Spike's point of view. Despite that, I don't see him as the protagonist of the Robin versus Spike plot because, for the most part, Spike is reacting and resisting. He doesn't drive that plot forward. He is not the one saying, I've got to make sure this trigger isn't working. I've got to get it out of his head. Though, more or less, he probably agrees that's a good idea. Robin, on the other hand, has been actively looking for a way to kill Spike for the right time, as we're told in the beginning. Spike now argues they should take the chains off of him. He claims he's detriggered. Spike asks about the song. What does it mean? Spike says it's early one morning. It's an old folk ditty. It means nothing. His mom used to sing it to him. And then he adds, when he was a baby, and claims there's no emotional significance. He says Buffy should worry about Dawn instead, but Buffy tells him Dawn's tough. The scene cuts to Dawn saying, ow, as Willow puts a bandage on her head where she was cut. Kennedy comments on Spike's trigger being active this whole time, and Rona is shocked. How could Buffy let him be with them, given that? Anya tells them don't waste their time sorting that out. Spike has a get-out-of-jail-free card that doesn't apply to the rest of them, and she goes on that he could slaughter 100 frat boys. Willow and Xander give her a pointed look, and then she segues into how forgiveness makes us human, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Willow gets a phone call from someone named Fred in L.A. In the basement, Spike insists there's nothing to tell about him and his mother. She was a nice lady. They got along fine. And then he yells that there isn't anything. Buffy doesn't seem to notice that he is protesting too much. She tells Giles the stone didn't work and she's going to unchain Spike. Another spot where I feel Buffy is inconsistent. Before she said, well, the trigger isn't active anymore. Now she's saying the stone didn't work, which makes it sound like she thinks it was. Giles argues the stone didn't work because Spike is not cooperating. The trigger is still active. Spike looks at his own hand. The scene cuts to another flashback where Drusilla takes Spike's hand. They're in his house in the living room. They dance and talk about their plans. And D.B. Woodside commented that part of what is so special about Drew and Spike is that they are terrifying and yet there is humor. And the writers add that both of them genuinely care about each other and about their own agenda. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil. James Marsters said he loved that they finally told this intermediate step between William and Spike. Spike and Drew talk about bringing the world to its knees, and then we get to what might be my favorite exchange between them ever. Spike says, we'll ravage this city together, my pet, lay waste to all of Europe. The three of us will teach the snobs and elites with their federal just what, and Drusilla says, 3? And Spike, not catching her intonation at all, says, you, me, and Mother. We'll open up their veins and bathe in their blood as they scream our names across the what? Drusilla says, you want to bring your mom with us? And Spike says, well, yeah, you'll like her. Drusilla says, to eat, you mean? The mother enters and asks him where he's been. She's been worried for days. Spike tells her she won't have to worry about anything ever again, explains he's a creature of the night. His mother asks if he's drunk, but he tells her no more sickness, dying, or aging. He wants to do this for her. She's frightened. He hugs her, holds her, then tells her they'll be together forever and bites her. Another podcast you might love is World Gone Wrong, a fictional chat show about friendship at the end of the world. It is brought to you by the team who produced Unwell, a Midwest Gothic mystery, my favorite audio drama podcast. World Gone Wrong is a cozy chat show hosted by best friends Malik and Jamie. Set in a wildly fictional world, the two friends discuss topics like, what do I do if my ex-boyfriend gets taken over by an alien body snatcher? And what's the deal with that guy showing up in all our old pictures? Living through the apocalypse is hard, but it's easier with friends. Learn more about World Gone Wrong at audaciousmediacreative.com. The scene cuts to the present. Willow tells Buffy she got a phone call and has to take off for a day or two. Nothing Buffy needs to worry about. Maybe she'll even bring back some good news. Giles is not on board with Buffy unchaining Spike, but she does it anyway. This further sets up Giles versus Buffy conflict. At 20 minutes, 48 seconds, Buffy and Spike leave the basement. Robin calls Giles over. It's just the two of them, and he tells Giles he's concerned about Spike too. If the trigger's still working, Robin says the first must be waiting for just the right time. And he tells Giles about the first slipping and telling Andrew it wasn't time for Spike yet. This pinpoints why I don't buy that Buffy is so blind about the trigger, because Buffy heard that as well. I would have been more on board with Buffy's choices if her argument was, I can keep everyone safe. I will keep an eye on Spike, because she also knows that Spike had a soul when he killed all those people when the first was controlling him. So I'd rather see her seeming overconfident in her ability to protect others, or maybe to spot that it's starting to happen soon enough to intervene, rather than just insisting that it's not a problem. Robin thinks Giles should talk to Buffy. After all, Buffy will listen to her Watcher. Giles thinks Robin doesn't know much about Watchers and Slayers if he believes that, but Robin explains that he does. He was raised by Crowley, a Watcher. That's when Giles realizes that Robin is Nikki Wood's son and that Spike killed Robin's mother. Giles points out that this sounds like personal vengeance against Spike, and Robin makes a good point. He asks if it matters. Spike will be their undoing, and Buffy will never see it until it's too late. And he says, quote, "You know I'm right," unquote. Giles responds, "What exactly do you propose?" And Robin says he just needs Giles to keep Buffy away for a few hours. There are major commitments here, which is what we often see at the midpoint of a story. Robin makes a major commitment by revealing his agenda to Giles. Giles could easily go to Buffy. So Robin is taking a big chance here. He's throwing caution to the wind. He's going to put this plot into motion. Giles makes a major commitment by going along with it, contrary to what he knows Buffy would do. A couple things on this. One, the Giles versus Buffy subplot. This is the midpoint. The earlier parts set it up, set it moving. Giles' anger about the chip. It continued with his frustration that Buffy's unchaining Spike and his fears. And often with a subplot, you might go right to the midpoint from setting it up. You don't necessarily need all the interim plot turns. And here Giles makes this major commitment. And as we'll find out, it has serious consequences for his relationship with Buffy. On a character note, Robin, I buy that he does this. It is very well set up. Robin doesn't have a long history with Buffy. He doesn't have reason to know that Buffy does the right thing. Yes, she has made some mistakes in the past, but ultimately she makes the hard choices. Robin doesn't know this about her. He doesn't have as much reason as Giles does to trust Buffy. And he saw Spike kill his mother. Plus, there's some logic to what he is saying. He genuinely believes that Spike is this great danger and that the first will use Spike. So I completely buy Robin. I really struggle with Giles. I get his concern. And if we looked at Giles only from this episode, yes, it fits. They built it up. Even if we go back a couple episodes, if you look at Giles' arc over the whole series, which maybe I will do in a bonus episode for patrons at some point, I don't buy it. Giles has gone back and forth about Spike, but he did not think Buffy should kill Spike once he had the chip. He laughed when Buffy confessed that she was sleeping with Spike. He was angry at Spike for pursuing Buffy. He worries clearly that Buffy is not taking the danger Spike poses seriously, but I just don't see him taking this step. He knows that Buffy made hard choices. She killed Angel. She had to oppose Willow, her best friend. There is no reason for him to think that Buffy suddenly cannot make good decisions. If you think differently, though, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Email me, buffystorypod@gmail.com. On the DVD, Drew Goddard said that he did almost a dozen drafts of this scene because he was concerned about Giles' choice and that people wouldn't buy it. Spike also makes a major commitment here in the flashback by biting his mother and turning her into a vampire. He doesn't know how that's going to work out. It turns out not well. And that's part of what keeps this Spike versus himself plot rolling and what makes the flashback so compelling, because they are telling their own story of Spike's transition from William to Spike. And it is intertwined with the story of Spike coming to terms with what happens with his mother. Giles and Buffy go to the graveyard for training, though Buffy is not sure this is the right time, but Giles says she always needs to stay sharp, especially now. Buffy is a little worried about having left Spike with Robin to watch over him. Giles points out that everyone at her house seemed pretty relieved. Giles tells her they're on the verge of war. She needs to look at the big picture. Buffy protests that she's always doing that. She gave an inspirational speech to the telephone repairman the other day. Giles tells her being a leader is about more than making speeches. She has to make hard decisions. Buffy asks if he's seen how she's treated the potentials, her friends, Andrew. She knows how to make hard decisions. Giles says that's what they're there to find out while they work on the basics, and a vampire hand comes out of a grave. The scene cuts to Robin. He lets Spike into a workroom or shed out in his yard. It is covered in crosses. They're nailed to the wall. They're in the windows. They're standing on all the furniture, which is basically just some work areas. Spike is quite taken aback, and Robin tells him it's the Hellmouth. You can never be too careful. Robin starts his computer and clicks a mouse. Spike asks what Robin's story is. Robin claims he's just trying to do what's right and make a difference, and he asks about Spike. What kind of man is he? Spike says he's not much for self-reflection. Robin, as they talk, puts on a wrist harness, brass knuckles. Later, he puts on a glove that has these like spiky things on it. And he says that Spike seems like someone who careens through life unaware of the damage he causes. And that he's been looking for Spike for a long time, quote, ever since you killed my mother, unquote. And Spike responds, killed a lot of people's mothers. Robin says Spike would remember she was a slayer, and Spike asks if Robin brought him here to kill him. Robin says no, he wants to kill the monster who took his mother from him, and he clicks the mouse. Early one morning starts to play. Spike vamps out, and Robin says, there he is. This is about 28 minutes into the episode. On the DVD, the writers said that was the end of the act. It's a bit early for the plot structure I look at, where I look at every quarter of the story, but I do see this as that last major plot turn. It grows from the midpoint and takes the story in yet another new direction and further raises the stakes. And this grows from that midpoint of Robin making that commitment. There's a commercial on return. Spike comes down the stairs in his house. He's not in vamp face. He walks into the deserted living room looking for his mother. A music box plays early one morning. His mother enters. Spike comments that she's glowing. And his mother says she supposes she has him to thank. How will she ever repay him? There is an edge to her voice, some sarcasm, but he doesn't notice. He's so happy, and he says, seeing her like this is payment enough. She walks over to him, comments that he's so tender. He is excited about the two of them together forever. And I keep calling him Spike, but he is really more William in these moments. He says all of London will be before them. He proposes they could go to the theater and dancing and asks what's her pleasure. His mother responds, pleasure? To take my leave of you, of course. She quotes his poetry, asks if he honestly thought she could bear an eternity listening to that twaddle. The scene cuts to the present. Robin just hit Spike and is yelling at him to fight back. Spike is in vamp face. The scene cuts to his mother twirling. He is still looking human, looking like William. His mother says how wonderful she feels. It's like she's been given new eyes. She understands everything, sees everything, and William/Spike is shocked. Drew Goddard commented that Spike is an anomaly in the vampire world. He has some facet of his soul, even when he's turned to a vampire, and has more humanity than most vampires do. And Goddard said perhaps it is something about the character of him as a man that he retained, and that the show has never explained it. It also raises some questions in vampire lore and in Spike's overall arc. And perhaps that's why there is some inconsistency where we see Spike becoming a better and better person, and then there is that time he attacks Buffy, and the show's reasoning is he didn't have a soul. So he ultimately was going to do evil things, couldn't make this distinction, and yet we see him progressing toward being able to make those choices. And since the show never really explains why is Spike different, why does he have more humanity than other vampires, it creates this inconsistency in the writing. It raises questions for all of Buffy too. Could other vampires, if you gave them these chips, have the journey that Spike had? I do love it though. I don't mind that it's open. And I love that Spike retains that much of who he was as a person. His mother says she hates to be cruel and then corrects herself. She used to hate to be cruel in life, but now, and she tells him nothing else will pry his fingers off her apron strings ever since he slithered from her like a parasite. And we cut to Robin and Spike fighting. Spike is fighting back now. And we cut between past and present. The mother keeps taunting. William says she should have killed him at birth. Spike looks away from her and from Robin. Robin is pressing across to Spike's face, and the mother says she prayed William would find a woman to release her, but who could compare to his doddering, housebound mom? He claims he's not that person anymore, and she says that's who he'll always be, a limp, sentimental fool. Robin flings Spike across the room, then punches him out, yelling at him about killing Robin's mother. Drew Goddard said originally they thought the story of flashbacks would be in Never Leave Me, but it was too much for one episode and they moved it to this one. I am glad they did because this fits so well with this story about Spike's trigger and adds a lot of layers to what otherwise would be Robin's revenge plot without that much emotional resonance for Spike. And that is why I say this is a Spike versus Spike subplot. He has to come to terms with what happened with his mother, what his mother says and does as a vampire, and his choices. He will say later that Robin cured him, but Spike really cured himself. Giles makes clear earlier the stone doesn't work because Spike isn't cooperating, but now he is. The scene cuts to Buffy. She's about to kill the vampire in the graveyard. Giles tells her not to, so she doesn't. And he asks if she'd let the vampire live if it meant saving the world. Buffy says sure, he seems nice enough. The vampire thanks her and introduces himself. He's Richard. The fight continues. Buffy is holding back. And she tells Giles they had this conversation when she told him she wouldn't sacrifice Dawn to save the world. Giles says, but Buffy is different now with all she's been through. Faced with the same choice, Buffy would let Dawn die. And Buffy says she would if she had to save the world. I would love to know what Buffy went through that would make her make that different decision. I'm not sure I disagree with it. Buffy has had really hard times, and she finally opened up to how much she loves Dawn. And I'd love to know, how does that play into that? Why would Buffy make a different choice now? It would have been great to see that develop over the season, that even as she is closer to Dawn, she is more willing to make the hardest choices. Or is it because Buffy saw that army of vampires, because she sees that the world is at stake and it's a much more visceral reality perhaps than before? So many questions, and I wish we'd spent time on that rather than earlier in the season, some of those episodes that felt very repetitive, or, and this is just me, rather than spending all this time on Andrew. Apologies to the people who love Andrew. The vampire attacks, knocks Buffy into a tombstone. Giles again tells her not to kill him and asks if she really understands that everyone's expendable. I feel like this scene tells me that Buffy will still listen to Giles. She's here going through this training, having this conversation despite not seeing the point. Buffy knocks the vampire aside, turns to face Giles and says, yes, I get it. And Giles says, and yet there is Spike. The vampire flies into Buffy, literally blindsiding her, very symbolic of what Giles has just done, and the scene cuts to Robin. The climax of all these plots is starting. It's about 32 minutes, 50 seconds into the episode, so a bit early for the climax to start, but we have a lot of clashes to get to here. Robin grabs Spike, who's on the ground, and rips that leather coat off of him. So Robin gets his mother's coat back. He sets it aside, takes a giant stake from the wall. But now we switch to the climax, or the start of it, for the Spike versus himself plot. The mother is taunting Spike about whether he'll even be able to love his new little trollop. She tells him all he's ever wanted was to get back inside her, to sink into his mother, and he finally got his wish, an eternal kiss. Spike protests it wasn't that. He's kind of grossed out by what she's saying. He just wanted to make her well. She comes closer and closer, taunting him more, seeming to be offering to have sex with him, or almost to force him into it. He shoves her away. She vamps out and threatens him, and he says to her, I'm sorry. In the present day, Robin hears Spike say, I'm sorry, and is shocked. The scene cuts back to Spike, who stakes his mother. He was apologizing in advance for staking her, or perhaps for turning her. For a moment, her face looks human again, very kind again, and she dusts. I have always read this, that she reverts to who she was, that this is the true person. The things she said were because she became a vampire, and that now she is freed from that. But it is not entirely clear. This is, we'll find out how Spike reads it, and he has, as we'll learn, de-triggered himself. So Spike has prevailed in the Spike versus himself plot, meaning the Spike who wants to be a good person. Robin tries to attack Spike with that giant cross, but now Spike stops him and throws Robin across the room. Robin asks Spike if he thinks sorry will make everything right, and Spike tells him he wasn't talking to Robin. He doesn't care about Robin's mother. She was a slayer. He was a vampire. That's how the game is played. Robin's angry that Spike called it a game, but Spike says that's how it is. That's what the Slayer signed up for, and Robin says he didn't sign up for it. If you're looking for a good winter read and you like crime novels, you might enjoy my QC Davis novel, The Charming Man. Trapped inside a high-rise while a blizzard rages through the city, can Quill save a missing girl from a killer? Chicago lawyer Quill C. Davis still grieves the death of the man she loved, but can't refuse when a friend who is like a mother to her begs for help. As a blizzard rages, Quill agrees to search for a missing college girl. The quest takes her to an isolated apartment complex where she questions the girl's neighbors. When one is found dead soon after, fears for the missing girl escalate. Cut off from authorities by the worst storm in Chicago's history, Quill knows time is running out. Then the power goes down and the body count rises. Determined to protect those trapped inside with her, Quill follows the clues, desperate to find the missing young woman before the killer does, and before anyone else ends up dead. The Charming Man, a 2019 Wishing Shelf Book Award finalist, is the second book in the QC Davis mystery series, but it also stands alone. If you enjoy crime novels featuring clever female detectives, unraveling mysteries, and life and death stakes, then you'll love this addition to the series. Get The Charming Man today in large print, paperback, or ebook editions. Find The Charming Man and all the QC Davis novels at lisalilly.com. That's LISALILLY.com. I'm not sure Spike's right that Robin's mother signed up for it. The Slayers don't exactly volunteer. On the other hand, over the years, we have seen times that Buffy has briefly quit. In the end of season 5, she told Giles she would if Dawn died. So perhaps Slayers can walk away. In any event, Spike taunts Robin that that's the real issue. And Robin says his mother was his world. Spike responds, and you weren't hers. Doesn't that piss you off? Spike says he knows Slayers. No matter how many people are around them, they fight alone. It's the life of a chosen one. Everyone else be damned. And Robin's mother was no different. Robin insists his mother loved him, and Spike says, not enough to quit, though, was it? On the DVD, the writers commented that it was believable that Robin might win this fight because we've seen him take out vampires before, and that it was part of why they thought it was important to show Robin. He's in a tank top during a lot of this fight. You can really see how muscled he is, how strong. And that is a really good point because while it's unlikely Spike would get killed at this point in the show, the series has killed off key characters before, and we also believe Spike might kill Robin. And that is what creates suspense when you have sacrificed characters who other shows would never let go. Spike goes on that Robin's mother didn't love him enough to walk away from slaying, and then tells Robin that he, Spike, loved his mother so much that he turned her into a vampire so they could be together forever. She said nasty things to him. They weighed on him for a long time, but Robin helped him figure something out. And Spike says, see, unlike you, I had a mother who loved me back. A lot of this is falling action for the Spike versus himself plot. Falling action is where, after the climax, the writers tie up loose ends, fill in the blanks, resolve subplots. And here we are letting the audience know through Spike talking to Robin what all of this means to Spike, what Spike now believes. And he says that when he sired his mother, it set loose a demon and it tore into Spike, but it was the demon talking, not her, and he realizes that now. Spike says, "My mother loved me with all her heart. I was her world." He clicks the mouse and the song plays, and Spike stays very calm. It doesn't trigger him. He says it's a nice little song and thanks Robin for curing him. There is an inconsistency in what Spike says when he talks about he unleashed a demon and the demon said those things, because Spike became a vampire and he still loved his mother. He did not want to kill his mother, unlike Angel, who we know first thing he did was slaughter his family, and that is not what Spike does. But I believe this is how Spike sees it, and it completely fits with who he is. Now he tells Robin he has his own free will. He's not under the First's influence or anyone else's. Spike goes on, "I just wanted you to know that before I kill you." Spike vamps out and bites Robin. The episode goes to a commercial. Now we get to the climax of the Giles versus Buffy plot. Giles tells Buffy Spike is a liability. He refuses to see it, and so does Buffy. Angel left because he saw how harmful the relationship was to Buffy, but Spike lacks self-awareness. Buffy argues Spike's there because she wants him there. She needs him. She's in the fight of her life. And the vampire says, "Really?" And Buffy says, "Not you, Richard." Giles' comment about Angel leaving made me think about the difference between the two. And I talked about some of it in the bonus episode for patrons on Buffy's love life, Angel versus Riley versus Spike. But I don't think I specifically got to this. Yes, Angel left. He made the decision for Buffy. Giles sees Spike as being flawed because he's not making the decision for Buffy, but it supports the idea that Spike and Buffy really is more of an adult relationship. Buffy was still in high school. She was at the end of adolescence. And maybe Angel did the right thing in leaving, so she had more options, more chances to choose what she wanted her future to be, rather than, in his eyes, holding herself back by staying with him. I'm not saying that was the right decision, but it fits more that Angel might do that given where Buffy was in life 4 years later. And with so much that has happened, Buffy as a character is much more portrayed as an adult. And Spike has always respected Buffy, treated her as an equal even when he was her adversary. And I would not expect, and Buffy would not expect, that Spike would make a decision for her. And when he says he should probably leave, Buffy tells him to stay, and he does. I get why Giles sees this as a flaw or lack of self-awareness, but I see it as Spike respecting Buffy and her choices and what she wants. Giles argues about the things Spike did in the past, including attacking Buffy, and Buffy says he has a soul now. Giles responds that the First is exploiting that, and that's when Buffy realizes Giles is stalling. She dusts the vampire almost as an afterthought. This, to me, is the climax of the Giles versus Buffy plot. Buffy prevails in that she calls a halt to this training exercise, dusts the vampire, and runs off. Giles says it's time to stop playing the role of general and start being one. This is the way wars are won. On the DVD, David Fury said that the scene included Giles telling Buffy that he killed Ben, that it was a long speech with his confession about that. But when they watched the episode, they realized it was too long and nobody cared about that. This was season 7 now. I feel like that's another casualty of the fact that there was no streaming at the time, and maybe viewers did not care about season 5 anymore. All of this would have worked much better for me as a viewer if I had heard that. Giles making the comparison to I was willing to kill Ben because that was the only way to stop Glory. puts this into a context where I can almost buy Giles' reasoning. So he isn't saying Spike is so evil or Spike can never change. He's making the comparison that sometimes you kill the one to save the many, the ethics question, the philosophy question. And his comment that Buffy would make a different decision now fits with that. At the end of season 5, he kills Ben and says Buffy will never do that because she's a hero. She is not going to kill a human, even to save the world. So now he's saying Buffy should be willing to make that choice. The scene cuts to Spike exiting Robin's shed and putting the coat, Nikki Wood's coat, back on. Buffy, out of breath, reaches him, asks what happened, and we really think Robin might be dead. But Spike opens the door. Robin sits in the shed against the wall, slumped, battered, very badly, but alive. And Spike tells Buffy he gave Robin a pass, let him live, because Spike killed his mother. But Spike says, quote, "but that's all he gets," end quote. And he tells Buffy if Robin so much as looks at him funny again, he'll kill him. Buffy takes a breath. She goes into the room with Robin, helps him up, and she tells Robin she lost her mom a couple years ago, came home and found her dead on the couch. She understands what Robin tried to do. But Buffy tells Robin the man who killed his mother doesn't exist anymore, and Buffy's preparing for war. Robin thinks she's deluded, but Buffy says Spike is the strongest warrior we have, and we are going to need him if we're going to come out of this thing alive. If you try anything again, he'll kill you. More importantly, I'll let him. I have a mission to win this war, to save the world. I don't have time for vendettas. The mission is what matters. Robin looks after her, eyes swollen, and then looks down. The scene cuts to Buffy looking in on Dawn, who has a bandage on her head where that cot hit her. On the DVD, the writers said that the episode was all about killing your parents, literally and figuratively. The original title was Mother and Son, but Drew Goddard pointed out that it isn't just about that. It's about Buffy and her father figure, Giles. So they changed the title. That is a clear theme of the episode. There is what I hope is an unintended theme here about mothers who work. Nikki Wood is doing her job. Her son, like most kids, I would think, doesn't like being left alone, doesn't like when she has to go to work. And so many mothers, and probably some dads, deal with this guilt, but most of societal pressure comes down on mothers, at least in the U.S. where I live. Spike is literally telling Robin his mother didn't love him because she goes to work. And he says he was his mother's whole world. Robin was not his mother's whole world, again, because she did her work. I do not think the writers meant to be saying that. It's a great example of how cultural attitudes seep into what we write, even if we don't intend it. And I wish there had just been a few tweaks. We're not necessarily supposed to believe that Spike has the right take on this. Clearly, it's Robin's fear that his mother didn't love him enough, and he needs to get past seeing his mother from a child's perspective, and Spike needs to believe he was his mother's whole world. So it isn't necessarily about one character finding the truth about their parents, or that there is one truth about anyone's parents. But it's troubling, especially given that they changed the episode to Lies My Parents Told Me, because it suggests Nikki is lying to Robin when she says she loves him and he's so important. At home, Giles stops Buffy in the hallway. He thinks that Spike is dead, and he starts to say he understands she's angry. Buffy tells him Spike is alive, Wood failed. Giles says that doesn't change anything. What he told her is still true. She needs to learn. And Buffy cuts him off and says, "No, I think you've taught me everything I need to know." She closes the bedroom door on his face. And that ends the episode. This is so strong, partly because there is so much emotion that we see for Spike with his mother, that we see for Robin coming face to face with Spike, trying to kill him, having to deal with his loss and sadness over his mother, and then Buffy and Giles. This is meant, I think, to be Giles not being able to accept Buffy being an adult, making her own decisions, and Buffy having to close the door on turning to that parent figure for guidance and seeing that her parent figure, her father figure, can make terrible mistakes. It also raises some great questions because we don't know if Buffy made the right choice, though it does seem clear, at least, that the trigger is no longer active. Other than foreshadowing, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and a special thank you to patrons who are part of the Patreon community and support the podcast. I hope you'll all come back in 2 weeks for a holiday episode. I will be looking at the top 5 and bottom 5 Buffy episodes ever. I thought that would be a fun way to end 2024. And we are back for foreshadowing, which does include spoilers. Willow getting that phone call from someone named Fred in LA and telling Buffy she might come back with some good news foreshadows Willow crossing over to Angel, which I will be covering. She goes there to help re-ensoul Angel, and she brings back Faith. After the New Year's episode, I will be talking about salvage on Angel, which is the first episode where Faith comes back. Spike killing his mother foreshadows something else in Angel, a minor moment, but there is an episode where Wesley in the last season thinks that he has killed his father, and Angel and Spike both tell him their stories about killing their parents. And Spike includes something like, well, then my mother tried to shag me and I had to kill her. And Wesley is really not comforted by all these tales. The questions that Spike having more humanity in the way the chip works for him raise are explored a bit, probably not purposely, in that last season of Angel, because when Angel takes over Wolfram and Hart, there's a rule: no human blood drinking. All the vampires have to agree. They're only going to drink animal blood, and they get tested regularly. Giles' comment about Buffy would make a different choice now she'd let Dawn die, I am not sure I buy that that is true, and I think it is mostly there to add suspense in conversations with dead people. Joyce, or maybe be the first pretending to be Joyce, tells Dawn that Buffy won't be on her side, and now we get this, well, you'd make a different choice. All of this seems there to create some fake tension, because ultimately the way Buffy is not on Dawn's choice is she sends Dawn away to try to protect her, and Dawn is mad at her. I wish they just had not included it. I don't think it adds that much to the season. And for me in this episode, it just distracted me. If they were going to include it, I wish that we would have explored that further. Buffy telling Giles he taught her everything she needs to know foreshadows a moment in one of the last episodes where Buffy is working out her plan to share her power with all the other potential slayers. Giles starts to tell her something, and then he says, if you want my input, and Buffy says she does. So it is this moment where they are connected again, where Giles is a good resource for her, meant to show that they appreciate one another again. Finally, Buffy's comment that Spike is the strongest warrior they have foreshadows that Spike plays a key role, that he does help save the world, not through physical strength, but by wearing that amulet, handling the pain that it causes, and sacrificing himself, which ultimately shows Buffy was right and her judgment was not clouded by her feelings for Spike. So that is it for this episode. Thank you again for listening. Please come back in 2 weeks for the end of the year episode on my top 5 Buffy episodes and the bottom 5 Buffy episodes, as well as honorable mentions for each category. You can find back Buffy and the Art of Story episodes, as well as the Buffy and the Art of Story books and all my fiction and nonfiction at lisalilly.com. For more Buffy and the Art of Story content, early releases of regular podcast episodes, and access to my course, How to Plot Your Novel from Idea to First Draft, join the Patreon community at patreon.com/LisaMLilly. That's patreon.com/LISA, M as in Marie, LILLY. Music for this episode was written and performed by Robert Newcastle. Buffy and the Art of Story is a production of Spiny Woman, LLC, copyright 2024. All rights reserved.